everybody, I'm here with a video talking about a topic that seems to have been somewhat popular, at least for what I've been watching on sort of like witchy YouTube, is the topic of tulpas. And you may be like, what is a tulpa? So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about what a servitor is. I'm going to talk about what a tulpa is. I'm going to talk about what an egregor is. And then I'm going to express, some cautions that I have about dealing with these things, because I think that it's kind of become like a little bit of a hot, trendy topic. And I think that people are sometimes not always talking about some of the downsides with this. And so I think it's important to think about those things too, and to take some cautions. It doesn't mean don't work with these things, but to take some cautions when you're talking about tulpas. So what are tulpas? Tulpas are a thought form that a practitioner, a magical practitioner, whether they call themselves like a witch or magician, has made that is, it originally comes from them, but it becomes separate and it becomes its own being. It becomes like a thought form that takes on its own life, has its own will, and is acting in the world as its own entity. So that's what a tulpa is. So a servitor, well, I'm going to start first by talking about servitor before I go into tulpas a little bit more. And I'll talk about egregors as well. So you may have heard all these terms and been like, what the heck, right? And they come out of mostly chaos magic. Chaos magic is a very particular brand of magic. I am not a chaotic magician. There are people who, obviously you can find on YouTube who are experts on these things, but I have read about chaos magic. I definitely have some books where I've read about chaos magic. I've also talked to people that practice this regularly. And I do incorporate some of the things from chaos magic into my own practice if it makes sense for me, but I would not consider myself a chaos magician, just to put that out there. So these are really some of these things are just my opinion and just based on some of the things that I've seen and heard from other people who've encountered these kinds of things. So just to put that out there in the first place. Now, a servitor, and servitors have become very popular as well. They've kind of crossed over into more mainstream, I would say, witchcraft from chaos magic. A servitor is a servant. So it is a thought form that the practitioner has created from their own mind and their own energy, and they've created it to do a specific task. So think of it, someone compared it to like your robot vacuum, and I think that's a great comparison. So the robot vacuum, the robot vacuums, does not have his own thoughts and feelings. And also, it doesn't do other things. It doesn't make you coffee. It doesn't talk back to you. It just vacuums. That's what it does. And that's great, right? And so people will create servitors to do a specific task. Like a servitor's job might be to find you some money. A servitor's job might be to bring a message to somebody. But whatever it is, they have a very specific job. And that job they don't go outside of those parameters. They do something very specific. And so how a servitor is created is that the person, the practitioner, has this idea in mind for, okay, I need a servant to do this thing, a servitor. And so they will sometimes describe it or draw it or have a picture of this thing in their mind, and they will program it and tell it that this is what you need to do. This is your job. And they will feed the servitor. So they might make a sigil, which is like a symbol that represents that particular servitor, and they will activate it usually through like magical practice in order for the servitor to do its work. And they will feed the servitor. And this might be in real life. They might light a candle or incense or give it offerings, or they may imagine the servitor being fed on the other plane, the otherworldly plane. There are different methods for it, but they will feed it. It's just like, the robot vacuum, you've got to like plug it in and you've got to like recharge it, right? Things like that. And usually it's only created for a certain amount of time. Some people have servitors that they continue to feed to do a specific task, but it's usually for a certain amount of time, and then they will often, the servitor will dissipate or they will dismantle it, usually through a magical ritual where they'll complete it and say it's done its work. Or sometimes they imagine it retiring to the other world and being, continuously fed in a magical way. That's another thing I've heard people do. But basically it's kind of like, okay, the robot vacuum is done. You either, recycle it or throw it in the garbage or whatever. But you have it to do a specific task. It doesn't take on its own form. It doesn't, talk back to you. It doesn't run away one day. Although I do think it's funny when I do see those videos of robot vacuums, Roombas and things who have gotten out of the house and are going down the street. I think those are pretty hilarious, but I digress. But a servitor does a specific job, right? It does a very specific job. It is doing it's not an entity that takes on its own personality and its own form. Tulpas are kind of like the next level up. Tulpas are when the practitioner creates something again, their energy, their thoughts, they create a being almost like an imaginary friend, like it's somebody that they are creating to be physically independent from them. And so a tulpa, it takes a lot more energy to make a tulpa. To make a tulpa, you have to, like, again, have a very clear vision of what this entity is, what it looks like, what kind of personality it has, and then you continue to feed it either by giving it offerings or, again, going to the astral plane, conversing with it, putting energy into it. And over time, it builds up and it begins to take on its own form. And people have talked about how they'll start to hear things, they'll start to see things. They may have like actual interactions around them. In the outside world, they're like, oh, this spirit is speaking to me. This tulpa is giving me signs. This tulpa is working with me. It usually creates quite a lot of time because a lot of energy has to go into that. And often practitioners will talk about things like feeling like when they're making the tulpa, when they are putting the energy in, sometimes they're splitting their attention or some of their energy is dissipated because it's going into this. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the cautionary things with tulpas, but that's basically what a tulpa is. The tulpa is not the robot vacuum. The tulpa is like making a new friend, right? It's making a friend, it's making an individual, to be, often people will create them as a kind of companion in some way, again, like an imaginary friend, right? So then let's talk about egregors. So what's an egregor? An egregor is an entity that becomes real in the outside world or takes on some sort of form because a lot of people have put thought into it. So a great example of an egregor is Slender Man. So if you don't know who Slender Man is, you can Google it. But basically, it started off as a fictional story on Creepypasta, which is a website that had like people would have fictional like spooky stories. And so it was a spooky story about a tall, elongated, black figure, a figure like that was just like a black, what do they call that? Like it looks like it's just like a dark figure, right? Tall, really, really tall and slender. And then people started to say they were seeing it in the outside world. There were stories about people like looking out their window and seeing Slender Man down the street, or that was following them in the woods, or they woke up at night and was in their bed. Like people started to see it, and it was because so many people put this energy into it. And then the more people like say those stories and like people read those stories, it starts to become a thing in people's minds, and it becomes a thing in some ways in the outside world, right? So an egregor is kind of like a tulpa on steroids in some ways. There are also positive examples in some ways of egregors, like Santa Claus. Santa Claus, you think of how many kids have believed in Santa Claus, right? And you think about it, in some ways Santa Claus does live in our world. We see Santa Claus, people dress up as Santa Claus at the mall. People will swear, it's the spirit of Christmas and stuff. It's sort of taking on a life of its own. And that's kind of a very loose version of an egregor, but it is, it's people have put belief into it, right? And so it starts to sort of become a thing in the world in some fashion. Some people also argued that Elf on the Shelf is an egregor or a fairy that made a deal with someone to become real, but that's a story for another day. But that's what an egregor is, if you hear that word. But tulpas, it's interesting that has become kind of a bit of a popular topic on WitchTube and Witch Talk, because I think tulpas, first of all, I think it is a more advanced practice. I think it's pretty hard for somebody who's just a beginner to make a tulpa. You can't make a tulpa overnight. I'd be very surprised. I mean, maybe there's some people who are, crazy, amazing practitioners who can make one overnight, but it usually takes a lot of energy and a lot of time to create one. But then what's interesting is to me is that it is a practice that I think does come with some cautions to it, because you have to, the one thing in witchcraft, and I've been around for a long time, I am turning 50 this week, woo woo, 50, and I've been practicing some form of magic since I was 16. So what is that? it's like 34 years or something. I've seen and heard a few things and experienced a few things in my life. And one of the truisms of witchcraft is you don't call in which you cannot dismiss. And so I feel like there is a danger, especially for those who may not be as practiced or may not have taken precautions, that if you create a tulpa, it might get away from you. After all, you are creating it to have its own free will. And so one day it may not do what you want it to anymore. It may say, hey, no, I'm going to go do my own thing. And it can cause issues and problems, and it can create some chaos. And if you are not skilled enough to take apart the tulpa or to dismiss it in some way, that can cause issues. I think also, if we are, especially during the early stages, splitting some of our attention and splitting some of our energy into this, I think that's something that can be a little bit, I hesitate to say the word dangerous, but I think it can be something that you have to take caution with. I think, I would hope if somebody is doing that and they're at that level, that they are taking cautions, that they are doing those things. But I think, it can lead to things like you're more likely to get ill, or you're more likely to, not be as focused as you normally are. And that's something I think you have to be aware of. You have to be like very careful, like make sure that you are caring for yourself, protecting yourself. I think it also leaves you open to entities that can be not so nice. And so I think it's really important to make sure you're always practicing good protections and spiritual hygiene. I might do a whole other video about that, because if you're splitting some of your energy for a while, or your energy's lower, that just makes you a little more vulnerable. I'm not saying anything bad will happen, but it's just saying like be a little more cautious, right? Like that's all I'm saying. Be a little more cautious about things. But don't invite, be careful what you ask for, because you just might get it. Be careful what you ask for, what you speak out, because you just might get that thing. And then it may not be really what you want, or maybe you thought you wanted it, but you didn't really. And tulpas, like if you're creating an entity to be like a companion, well, as we've all experienced in our lives, like we've had friends that we've had fights with and we're not friends with anymore. We've, all dated people that we're not dating them anymore. And so it's like you can create something and it may one day be like, I'm not really interested in being here anymore, or it might start to cause trouble or cause, things to happen. It doesn't mean it will. I want to say, like, I'm not saying don't do this or whatever. I'm not saying that it will create problems. I'm saying it could create problems. And so you have to be prepared that that is an outcome that might happen. I think also you have to examine why you want to create a tulpa. I've seen some things where people are like, oh, I just want to do it because to see if I can. I don't know if that's really a good reason to do that. I mean, everybody has their own things and everybody has to examine their own reasons for doing that, right? But I think like just because you can do something doesn't always mean you should do something. Also, too, I've heard people saying, oh, I'm creating it because I want a companion. And I mean, again, each individual has to assess for themselves what's good for them, right? But I also think that maybe if that's the reason, then maybe there's some other things that need to be addressed. Like maybe they're feeling lonely, or maybe, there's relationship issues that they're having to deal with. And so I think that you have to do a rigorous self-examination is what I'm saying, of why you want to create another entity to keep you company, or to see if you could do it, right? It's sort of like getting a puppy just to say, well, I just wanted to see if I could get a puppy. Well, yeah, but are you going to care for it? Like it's a responsibility, and again, the puppy may get sick or the puppy may bite you. So you have to, I'm just saying you have to think about these things, because sometimes I see people sort of talking about tulpas as if like, oh yeah, it's fun and it's just like a fun imaginary friend. It's not quite like that. Yeah, I just think you have to be cautious. And I guess the moral of the story is like, don't create something that you can't dismiss. Don't create a spell that you can't take apart, or you can't remedy. Be careful what you ask for, be careful what you wish for. You just might get it. Because I've heard stories, again, I've been around a long time, of, tulpa, like they may not have called it a tulpa, but invited in spirits and then had to dismiss them because they were causing problems, or they wanted like an imaginary companion because they felt lonely, and then when they found an actual person, that imaginary companion was not so happy about it. And so they, you have to be cautious about these things. All I'm saying. I'm not saying don't do it. I think, again, like with anything that you're doing that has some risk to it, take precautions, know what to do if something goes wrong. Really read up on it. If it's something you're really, really interested in and something that you're like, yes, I really want to do this, read up on it. To watch videos from people who are like, they're experts in it, talk to people, all those things, so that you feel like you have all of the information and that you know how to deal with it if something doesn't go quite right, if something goes a little sideways. And I think that's not just tulpas, that's anything really, that has some risk to it. So I'm just saying, from somebody who's been around for a while and seen some things and experienced some things, that you got to take precautions, practice good spiritual hygiene as well. Make sure that you are shielding and protecting and grounding yourself. You're doing all of those kind of things. I think I'm going to do another video. Let me know if you're interested in what to do if something goes awry, what to do to protect yourself, what to do to clear out energies. I can give you some ideas because I've dealt with some things in my time for sure. But I just wanted to put my thoughts out there about the whole tulpa thing and what my thoughts are. Again, these are just my opinions and based on like the things I've seen and heard and experienced, and just my thoughts. But let me know what you think, what your thoughts are. Is this something you've done or interested in doing, or are you like, no way? What are your thoughts? Let me know. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my patrons. You guys are amazing and awesome. If you want to check out my Patreon, of course, feel free to, no pressure. I do weekly tarot scopes and astrology reports, detailed astrology reports for the week. We also have a coven level. Right now our theme for the month is creativity, and we are working our way through the Aleister Crowley Tarot, so you can come check that out. Also, if you want a reading from me, it's my birthday month. I am turning 50. What? Crazy, I know. And so I have reduced prices on all of my readings for Etsy if you want to go get an Etsy reading from me. Anyway, you guys are the best. And as always, peace and love and light.